the majority of people who are trained to perform in the ring, anybody, and those guys can just work a match. Anybody can work a 10 to 15 to 20-minute match. But can you sell the emotion? Can you sell what you're portraying in that ring, in that time? Anybody can do flips, anybody can do this and that and the third. But can you sell the emotion to the fans? Can you sell that?
Backstage Brawl, welcome back. Y'all already know what it is. It is the Golden Child, a.k.a. Jean Louis, here with our usual suspects. We got the People's Champ, Randy Lewis. We got Kid Ty, Tyler Hicks. We got Diamond Cutter, Eric Brunson, holding the title. What it looks like you're holding the title. You're holding the title. You have a shirt there. What you doing? What you doing over here?
Acknowledge him.
You acknowledge? Oh, you gotta acknowledge.
I acknowledge.
You gotta acknowledge.
Roman Reigns.
Gotta acknowledge. Where the wreath at? We gotta put a wreath on you. Gotta put a wreath on somebody.
I wasn't prepared for props this episode.
Oh no, he gonna look at you. He gonna give you that look. He adopted the same look that Randy Orton got. The thick neck, got the
shit. It's Lent. It's Lent
season. Indeed.
It's Lent season. He's gonna put a whole Lent wreath around his neck. The way this is going.
We definitely gonna get to Roman Reigns. We definitely gonna get to this past weekend, but we got to kick it off with Monday Night Raw, off the heels of Sunday night's Hell in a Cell. A lot of things went down. Randy Orton, new world champion, off the heels of Hell in a Cell, and he has a new, or should we say, an old rival popping back into the works. You got the whole Hurt Business doing that thing against Retribution, which we're gonna get into. We got, like the whole thing with the Survivor Series, brand supremacy thing working on together. How did y'all? What's your biggest takeaways from Monday Night Raw?
I think for me, if you're looking for a match quality, my biggest takeaway was the match between Matt Riddle and Sheamus. They had the best match on the night. I felt like, if you needed to wake up a crowd, if there was a live crowd, that match would probably wake up a dead show. It was all right for what it was. The Firefly Funhouse is great, but in terms of like match quality, like trying to set up some Survivor Series, that match probably was the best match of the night. And it won't be talked about a lot because, obviously it was a story-driven night following a pay-per-view. That's how most Raws usually are. But for the most part, I liked how they went at each other. Very smash mouth. Sheamus does not get enough credit for being the kind of worker that he is in the ring. The hard hits he gave back and forth. Matt Riddle, I was surprised that Riddle actually took the loss. But I thought, with Keith Lee now going on to the Survivor Series team, you would have thought that they probably would have went younger, like they did last year. But I do like the fact that Sheamus went over. It was a very good match. It told a great story, and I had a very, they did that well. So that was my biggest takeaway from Monday Night Raw.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic that they had. Matt Riddle, Sheamus, of course, Keith Lee, as you mentioned earlier, he caught the W against Elias, and AJ Styles, of course, starting off the night, beating Jeff Hardy. All three of them now a part of the Raw side of the men's elimination match at Survivor Series. What do we think about that whole dynamic, in terms of them bringing back brand supremacy, Survivor Series, just this like mere weeks into this whole brand split?
Eric, you want to?
Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Okay,
I already said before we got on, and Randy said it was a fair point, but it's lazy booking so far. I mean, I get what they're trying to do. I get the fact that you're trying to hype up Survivor Series because at the end of the day, this is a different time in wrestling. But it's right now, it's like you wanted NXT to be a third brand, and now NXT is now an afterthought only a year removed. So I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody would love to have seen Lashley versus Priest versus Sami Zayn, or, Finn Balor versus Roman versus Randy. It would have been great matches. Or the one everybody was hype about, Sasha versus Asuka versus Io, which would have stole the whole show. So to me, it's lazy booking. Also, now, what are you really fighting for? NXT last year brought in a different dynamic, especially with the whole a lot of people getting left in Saudi and having the NXT guys come in to SmackDown last year. I mean, it made Survivor Series actually feel like something. That's what I need to get sold on. What are you gonna make me feel for this Survivor Series? How am I gonna get invested in this? Because the only match that I'm invested in that they've announced so far is the Street Profits versus the New Day. That's the only match on the card that I'm invested in. Other than that, it's like you can predict who's going to win and who's not going to win and how they're going to win.
Yeah, no, they like New Day and Oscar, they were kind of, you saw the little shade thrown at the SmackDown's way. Street Profits, they had the cups.
The promo wars.
Kofi had the headband. You know what I mean? they had that whole thing. They had the whole nines, and of course, Hurt Business came in after. Saw the TV. Of course, they had the promo to mock him. So, hot tag to Kid Ty. You wanted to touch base on this. What you think of this play?
I definitely agree with that sentiment in terms of Survivor Series, especially considering I feel like there was already a built-in story for this year's Survivor Series, which we'll get to in a minute. But in terms of brand, the brand, supremacy thing, for a while it's been a very shaky theme, because when you take away the blatant general managers, like the visible general managers from each show, and now you're not really playing off of the Fox dynamic much, unless you're talking about The Miz with his Fox connections messing with Otis's life. You're not really explaining why these two brands are fighting, other than because, it's tradition. And most traditions don't get questioned much, but in a situation like professional wrestling, where explanation is definitely not, I wouldn't say demanded all the time, but it definitely does help when storylines are very vague like this. You're in a situation where a lot of people are just wondering, what's the difference? You have them both in the same dome. I know they're going to be going on the road pretty soon, but the shows don't feel much different, especially when you consider the fact that the only difference between Raw and SmackDown right now is the fact that SmackDown has Raw's mid-card and Raw has SmackDown's mid-card a couple of weeks removed from the draft. So in terms of different matchups, there's not much different about it other than the colors right now. So I feel like that alone is a reason why it feels weird to go for brand supremacy, especially this close to the draft, like this far, not far removed, but this recently removed from the draft, I should say. Two, the NXT issue is very much true and apparent, and a lot of people are calling the company out on that, because they seem to be very choosy as to when they want to consider NXT a third brand, especially after last year, where you saw all the invasions between the three shows. You saw Tommaso Ciampa even going as far as saying, "Welcome to the main roster." And while that is very true to Ciampa's character, how he actually feels, it also served as a symbolic statement saying NXT is here to stay and to play. And now this year, there's no reasonable explanation as to why NXT is not involved. And even if you had the situation where you could say WWE doesn't want NXT involved this year as a way to fuel them for the takeover that's most likely going to happen on the same weekend, it could have worked thematically that way too. But the fact that there wasn't an explanation, period, feels like a missed opportunity, a missed booking opportunity that could have helped NXT. Maybe they'd come back in the Survivor Series next year for retribution. No pun intended. But the point being is, like, the fact that you didn't even put the effort into explaining why, the fact that you're not even trying to make, any logistical sense as to why this is happening, sucks. And honestly, like Eric said, right now, it's more so about selling you on why you should watch a pay-per-view this weekend in this pandemic era, versus logistically making the storylines going into that pay-per-view work the way they should. Because the only reason you want to watch Survivor Series right now is because there are three interesting matchups at bay. New Day versus the Street Profits, because they're very similar but different tag teams, right? Then you have Randy Orton and Roman Reigns, which we've seen at SummerSlam. We've seen it at a Big Four pay-per-view before, but these are two very different versions of the characters who are arguably on the best streaks of their career, especially in recent years. So that already has a lot of hype behind it. And then obviously Sasha versus Asuka in a rematch from their feud on Raw, but this time they're also Sasha slightly altered. She's more on the baby face, more on the, gritty, determined side versus Asuka, who's been waiting for a proper fight. Now, that can sell a pay-per-view, don't get me wrong, and it does its job. But what does it do for WWE in the long run when there are other storylines that I feel would benefit from Survivor Series being neutral this year? I think that it would have made more sense thematically for Survivor Series to be neutral because we've seen some of the peaks of the brand extension, brand supremacy deal, and especially after NXT washed both brands last year, right? This would have been the perfect year to take a break and focus more on the central storylines of the main roster. And I think the biggest missed opportunity that they had going into Survivor Series this weekend is the fact that they didn't do Team WWE versus Team Retribution.
Ooh.
I personally think that that was the storyline that would have made the most sense. And the reason why I say that is because for weeks, it was not just Raw being terrorized. It was also SmackDown. Members from both rosters were being terrorized by Retribution, starting, if you want to, predated back to the SmackDown hacker having dirt on a lot of injustice on the SmackDown roster. The fact that there were people being chased around the building, personnel being chased, Michael Cole attempting to sound like he's shrieking in fear. You have Corey Graves being run off from the table. You have people on Raw getting attacked, people on SmackDown, rosters coming out to attack Retribution because there's so many hired members, but now we're diluted down to like the five, right? The core five. But the fact of the matter is that I think that logistically would have made more sense for a neutral Survivor Series, which also served more on the sensible side to be neutral because it's also going to be revolving around The Undertaker this year. The fact that this is thematically Taker's Survivor Series to the day of his debut, there wouldn't be a need for Raw and SmackDown supremacy. It could have been just a come together, the whole roster coming together to put on a really special show, not just for Taker, but also to bring all their storylines together and have them reach a boiling point or climactic point in a more unified way. That way, the whole brand supremacy thing, they could have built a year into the future and brought it back next year would have felt like a new, fresh thing because we had a neutral Survivor Series this year. And I think all the elements played into Survivor Series being more about the show as opposed to the war of the shows. But that's just me.
Yeah, all good. I know People's Champ, he had his hand out for a hot tag for a minute. I don't know if he's trying to pull it back in. You hear People's Champ? What you thinking?
I'll just say this quick because I know we have to move on. I think the feel of this year's Survivor Series, especially the way they're presenting it, is kind of like how they used to do the All-Star game. This is basically what Survivor Series is being treated as. Well, this one especially. Obviously the theme may be for Taker, but it's basically just one of those, it's like a pickup game for wrestlers at least, from Raw and SmackDown. So when you get, two conferences or two different, people going against each other, this now two shows going against one another, they're going to do the best they can. As much as, the parameters of it don't make sense in terms of them going at it. It is what it is. But at the end of the day, as long as they have a good show in terms of performance-wise and honoring Taker, that should be the end result. But of course, with these times, it's kind of tough to kind of just think long-term of what you want to do with these shows, and of course the draft. We're not too far removed from the draft, so that kind of handicaps them in a sense. So. The only thing you could hope from here on out is the fact that they perform well and provide a great show and honor Taker.
Yeah. Before we take a step back and we evaluate the weekend, Hell in a Cell and Impact Bound for Glory, I do want to do a quick nod because you did mention Riddle versus Sheamus. We did mention the Survivor Series qualifiers. We kind of hinted at the New Day segment with Asuka, so we saw them on the show. Retribution, of course, they had that whole situation with the Hurt Business, which we can also follow up on Hell in a Cell. But the angle of which I think separated itself and turned a new leaf from Hell in a Cell into last night is the Fiend Bray Wyatt implementing himself in the main event situation between Drew McIntyre, who is now back on the chase, the babyface on the chase for the title, and an entitled, 14-time world champion in Randy Orton. Guys, what do we think about how they basically handled that from the opening segment, opening bell, to the end of the bell and the segment? What y'all thinking?
Well, that was the last segment of the show, having the moment of bliss. That actually, first off, I just want to acknowledge this real quick before I get into it. Alexa Bliss has killed this new role. I have no complaints with what they've been doing with Alexa Bliss and what she's been doing with the character, because it's a tale of two coins. It's like, you see the regular Alexa Bliss, she still comes out to her regular music and everything.
They tweeted last night. They tweeted the music.
They did.
They
It
tweeted
actually
music a little
sounds
bit.
scarier and
They
better,
tweeted
surprisingly.
the theme song.
Okay, so maybe I got to go back and watch it and hear it again. But it's like two sides of a coin. It's like she comes out as a regular Alexa Bliss, but then she could just say one thing and just mention the Fiend, and then next thing you know, she just switches it just like that, and it's just like, let him in, and then she changes right away. So I love the fact that Alexa Bliss is still in this storyline, and she's doing very well with this. But with the whole Fiend coming into the main event picture, we saw it coming. You saw it coming when Randy won on Sunday. It was, he doesn't forget. He just doesn't forget. And even though that was, Bray Wyatt of old, he's basically exercising his demons from when he was, Wyatt family swamp Bray Wyatt. Now that's basically what he's doing. And now he has a demon he has to exercise now with Randy Orton. Now, whether or not they go into either a triple threat match or they do a one-on-one match, who knows? I think the triple threat would be something that more people would want to see, only because it gives another depth not only to, all three competitors. It gives a depth to all three of them. To Bray Wyatt getting revenge on Randy Orton trying to basically get Drew McIntyre out the way now. Drew McIntyre still chasing Randy Orton, but now has to face another adversary in Bray Wyatt that he's never faced before. So it's like all three has an interesting dynamic. This is one program I would not mind seeing a triple threat match.
And it's awesome because, like, whatchamacallit, you have, again, these three distinct characters, of which we've been saying, like, a whole bunch of these storylines where, like, there's faces and heels, and sometimes, like, they intertwine. There's a clear face, there's a clear heel, and then there's Bray Wyatt in the middle, where it's just like, I'm just nutso, but I'm vengeful, and the things that I'm fighting for are right.
He's in his own group. Like, there's heel, there's face, heel, tweener, and then there's Bray Wyatt. That's it.
Yeah, and this is just this dynamic. You just brought up the fact that, like, imagining a triple threat, I could see, like, just as a quick fantasy book, a triple threat situation, where, like, Randy Orton, because he's the wily veteran, escapes with a victory after getting his ass whooped the entire match. And then it turns into a McIntyre Wyatt.
Triple threats and multi-man matches in general, where it's not like a tag match, are notorious for protecting people, advancing separate stories while being a part of a big overall, like, group. And I think that, that triple threat situation is something that's also refreshing for the WWE title in general, because a lot of the WWE championship has revolved around 1v1s the entire year. So getting that as we're closing out 2020, thank God, and hopefully moving into a better year, you kind of need that. And honestly, I was sold on it because, when Bray moved over to Raw, I personally felt like Bray should have never left Raw in the first place. I felt like there was unfinished business with Seth Rollins that they could have handled a little bit better post Hell in a Cell last year. And there's a lot of things that could have been worked a bit, because, like, moving him over to SmackDown kind of felt random to me. So seeing him back on Raw, I was happy to see him back in the environment that he should have been in the first place. But I was kind of curious as to what he was really going to do, especially when they had him in Retribution interact not too long ago. So I, even to the point where I pitched a whole turf war where maybe Bray, Braun, and Alexa are facing off against the Hurt Business and Retribution, which I still think could have worked. But my point being is like I think that the fact that Bray entering a program with Randy at this time and Drew still going after Randy, I think it was a really smart move, especially considering a lot of Bray's Fiend characters revolved around him conquering his own demons in his past and him going after certain people. And I love the way that Orton and Alexa sold it. I love the fact they used the Firefly Funhouse to promote the moment of bliss, kind of like that whole like giving some shout outs to the women, obviously, so, to kind of put their segments on a similar bar. But on top of that, the fact that like they made you wait for it and made you have to think about it. And then Alexa selling the character the way that she did with the new music, saying that of course I'd want to have the WWE champion on my show, as most talk shows would. And like, you know, her mentioning burning the house down, obviously referencing referencing like Randy Orton's previous encounters with Bray when he was part of the makeshift Wyatt family of 2017. And the fact that Randy earlier in the backstage interview with Charlie Caruso, you know, was saying, "I don't fear Bray Wyatt," but you can tell he was concerned. It's sort of like, you know, for years we you know theorized like what would have happened if Jake the Snake in 1991 got to face like Mind Games Undertaker of like 2004 or 5 or 6, like not the Taker that would like, you know, rookie Taker from 91, but more so like Taker as he got into his groove. And I see a lot of parallels between Randy Orton in his later stages of his career to Jake the Snake and how methodical he's gotten on the mic to complement his in-ring ability. So seeing that is kind of like the closest thing you can get to that right now. But on top of that, the fact that everything flows so seamlessly, the fact that Orton and Drew are not done, the fact that Drew can use being a part of the men's Survivor Series team for Raw as a proving case for why he should get another title match as opposed to just getting it because it fits the story narrative. And then the fact that, you know, Bray can just sit there and play with the two. Like Bray basically forced Orton to go like, Orton's like, I don't want to fight Drew, but I don't want to fight you. I'm gonna go fight Drew. And then Bray's just sitting there like, so you're not gonna impress me, huh? I'm still gonna get your ass, but I'm not gonna.
I'm gonna pose a question here.
Yeah.
You Tyler, you said that basically you had pitched for a turf war for Retribution and the Fiend, and you added Braun into the mix with Bray Wyatt. So I'm gonna take this from shouts out to good brother Bove. I'm gonna take this from him. He actually posted a picture on the Dirty Heels page, and it's the Fiend Bray Wyatt, Dexter Lumis, Alexa Bliss, and Bo Dallas. And he basically called it the Twisted Union. I think I would want to see that more than I would want to see Bray and Braun aligned together.
I mean, that's an interesting stable. Bo Dallas has been virtually inactive, I think, since November of last year.
Yes.
Yeah. And to have them finally, you know, recognize them as having some sort of bloodline, if they went down that route, would be pretty dope. And Dexter Lumis, I feel bad for him because, you know, like I think he had gotten injured recently, so his momentum had gotten cut off. That'd be a cool way to introduce him on TV and protect him because he kind of be in the similar position to where Luke Harper was a couple years ago. So hopefully they pull the trigger on using him versus Luke. But I wouldn't mind seeing that. Maybe they can do something like that post this match because.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'd want him in the
or somewhere down the line at least.
Yeah,
so
I'll say this. I'll say this much with that. It has a lot of promise. Only like simply off the fact that I think on the men's side, whether it's NXT or the main roster, all three men, I believe, had like legitimate singles runs. Bo Dallas, it may have been a long time ago, but he still had a legitimate singles run. Dexter Lumis is in the midst of a good singles run. This coming week, he's going to face Cameron Grimes. He's going to face Cameron Grimes.
Yeah,
that segment last week was jokes, by the way, where he just popped up out of nowhere. Just you don't talk about that, but you know, are you afraid of him? But like, you know, the dynamic, I think it'll play really, really, really well. Real quick before we get into, you know, speaking of NXT and the rest of that, do want to touch on Hell in a Cell because I mean, come on, let's be real here. Hell in a Cell, Bound for Glory. Let's kick it off with Hell in a Cell because Bound for Glory we could lead into NXT and AEW and Impact. What was your biggest takeaways? I already see the show up and win. I already see Randy's kind of, sheepish grin. How much time we gonna have on Roman Reigns, guys? Let
It's
let
not
them.
long. It's
I just
not
see my ass out.
The award goes to.
So before we get into
Yeah.
the main event, I just want to say, Hell in
There
a
we
Cell,
go.
this was probably one of the better pay-per-views of this year. I'll go as far as saying it's the best pay-per-view of this year.
You tripping?
Actually,
Hell in a Cell.
Wait.
You
I will
tripping?
go. I will go as far as
Last year was
Now the
shit.
Champions was good too.
You
it was. Clash of Champions was good,
But
but
Clash of Champions-
overall, Hell in a Cell
you
is
tripping
number one.
balls.
Hell in a Cell is number one for me.
Clash of Champions was good, but there was
WrestleMania, the 2-day WrestleMania was good. SummerSlam was good. Money in the Bank wasn't bad. Trying to go down the line here. What else did we have?
Payback.
Nah. I gotta go back and look at it again.
Point being, you're wrong. Continue.
Hell in a Cell. Okay, well that's my opinion. Hell in a Cell is number one for me. I was critical about the matches being on the card. There wasn't enough matches on the card, but it actually worked out in their favor. Now, don't get me wrong. There were some low points.
There was.
There was
Not
definitely
for Retribution again.
Yeah.
Continue.
There were some low points, but for the overall main card, besides the Jeff Hardy Elias thing, which I understand it had to end the way it did, Jeff got his revenge for getting hit with the guitar.
I'll get to that.
I get it. What other singles match was on there that wasn't in the cell?
I mean, it wasn't singles, but Retribution. Well, Slapjack versus Lashley for the U.S. title.
Or slap nuts, as the IWC has dubbed him.
Slap.
T-Jack.
Jeff Jarrett's slogan versus
Brutalized dildos, another one
So
I've seen.
that, besides those two, Sasha Banks and Bayley killed that match. Killed it. Loved every minute of it. They got so creative to the point where, like we said before we got on here, what the hell was Bayley building with those kendo sticks? I have no idea.
Yeah.
Death. But
Those kendo sticks look like my brain during this whole quarantine.
Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre, again, told a story. Great. I did not expect Randy to come out with the win, but he did, and I was not mad with it. And then the main event that most people want to talk about here, at least I do, the main event in my eyes, which started the show, Roman Reigns versus Jey Uso. I have said this time and time and time again.
What did you call him?
I'm sorry, the tribal
this
chief.
shit.
Okay, there we
Here
go.
we fucking go with this shit. It's gonna
There
be
we
insane
go.
with this shit.
I have said it again, and I'll say it again here. Jey Uso has once again proven himself to be a star, that he can be a top guy in a singles run. I mean, again, another match full of emotions, and it got even more violent. And it was like Roman even came out with a cast on his arm already, ready to. Oh my God, it was just so good. It was good. It was good. It was just. The show ended. I'm gonna quote Randy on this. The show ended at 7:50. It really did. It was that good. And then adding the Wild Samoans at the end to basically say Roman has the head of the table. Like, you are the head of the table. It was just great. Can't get anything better than that.
People's Champ. Yeah.
Listen, my man started crying.
He could have deserved an Oscar for that.
Yo, that was an Oscar-worthy performance. Cause I'm like,
he really started crying and then grabbed Jey Uso's hand
and choked
said,
him
"Yo,
out.
I love you. I love you, man. I love you." And then right after that, just said, "Nah, come here. Let me put you in the guillotine real quick." It was like, yo, I did not expect that.
It was a whole anime. I'm not gonna lie. It was a whole.
Oh, like,
no, I'm getting out of taken out of the welcome, guys. No, I'm gonna speak as me. That was a whole anime. Roman Reigns the entire match, and by the way, like, if there's any person who benefits from, and I said it before you even came back, like the era of like, no fans is going to be this guy, or like people to that nature, where like shit talkers, the Baron Corbins of the world. Wrestled, he did football, shit talker. Roman Reigns, shit talker. Usos, shit talkers. Orton, shit talker. All these shit talkers in the middle of the ring that have the mics pickups, you're going to get storytelling embedded in their matches throughout those things. I think that's one underlying theme that nobody, whenever everyone talks about their mic work and this, that, I'm like, wait till this happens. And so
Jey Uso definitely.
I love you too.
I told you so. Nah, but I said something that I posted on the Facebook page and I shared it, and we've had some great dialogue with it. The reason why we're so many people are enamored with this match is not because of just how well Roman has transitioned into a bona fide star that we wanted him to be. It's because that storytelling is alive and well in matches the way that we grew up watching. It's been a very long time. Like I've said this, and I'll say it here. When you watch professional wrestling, right, the majority of people who are trained to perform in the ring, anybody, and those guys can just work a match. Anybody can work a 10 to 15 to 20-minute match. But can you sell the emotion? Can you sell what you're portraying in that ring, in that time? Anybody can do flips, anybody can do this and that and the third. But can you sell the emotion to the fans? Can you sell that? Stone Cold, when he was doing his podcast, and Stone Cold is a mark for this. Stone Cold said, listen, and he said this in 2011, the wrestling has gotten much better. It's just the fact that the storytelling in these matches suck. Like, this year, we've seen a callback to a lot of storytelling features in professional wrestling. You saw it in the No Holds Barred at WrestleMania between Edge and Orton. You saw it at the greatest wrestling match ever between Edge and Orton. You saw it in the match between Taker and AJ. You even saw it in parts of the Money in the Bank.
Firefly Funhouse, don't forget that. There's a lot of people who still.
We know that. We're talking about other stuff that are underlying. The Firefly Funhouse, that goes without saying.
Storytelling on LSD.
Yeah.
And then here comes Roman. When he came back, I know there was a lot of people kind of like, I don't know. But when he finally made that turn into what he is now, and he took that next step this past Sunday, that's what drove people to love the WWE. If anything that WWE has done well over their heyday between the Ruthless, the Golden Era, and the Attitude Era, what made them so great to watch during those times was their storytelling in matches. You can talk about the promo stuff and all that kind of stuff, but the storytelling that made you want to watch, that made you invested in their promos, that made you invested in the character, that's what drives fans to come and watch and love what you see. Anybody can watch the NWA back then for the wrestling, but when you want something, when you want genuine emotion, that's what WWF and now WWE thrived on. That was their golden ticket. They went away from it for a long time, obviously in recent memory, but I think that's where, and I'll close by saying this, I think that's where the benefits of having no crowds have benefited these matches. Because obviously, for certain performers that are or somewhat deficient in that area, they were able to grow and hone in on those skills if you are proficient in that area. And that's what we're seeing right now. Jey Uso, we knew he had that talent. Roman, we knew he had that talent, but you had to keep squeezing that coal to find that diamond. And so far, he's starting to shine through that coal. We're starting to see that diamond shine bright, especially over the last couple of pay-per-view matches. So this is what fans have been dying to see, including me. I love storytelling in matches. this was a great opportunity to basically display that and see that. And of course, in the main event as well between Drew and Randy, you saw a heaping dose of that. You know, so I'm glad that storytelling in the last two pay-per-view events have been greatly shown and displayed to show why this is what made people love the WWE in the first place.
Yeah. Three different dynamics you mentioned two of the Hell in a Cell matches. Three different dynamics, three different forms of storytelling. I can argue Sasha and Bailey, the way that ended even, awesome storytelling coming in together from what they did on last SmackDown to then. Kid Ty, hot tag to you, man. What say you, brother, before we head on?
I'm as much as I enjoyed that very impassioned speech, I'm glad that we could talk about the rest of the card as well. Because I love me some Roman, don't get me wrong. I thought that the performance was amazing. My only critique with the match was, and this kind of goes in tandem with, how we were talking about Hell in a Cell and how it's one of those pay-per-views that doesn't have to be gimmicked to be good. And part of that is because you can build genuine stories that can make any B pay-per-view feel like an A pay-per-view, is the fact that I personally don't think that Roman versus Jay needed the cell. And the reason why, and I said it after the match had happened, and I clearly see why that's a mistake, because emotions are very high after a performance like that. And that's not a shot at Randy. That's not a shot at anybody who liked the match. What I was saying was that when you think about it, the match by itself as a moment was great, right? It was fantastic. It was done very well. But I realized that while it was very productive in getting people to watch the pay-per-view and watch the show, and they started off on a great note, which had to be followed up throughout the show, right? You also take away, I think it's also fair not to criticize it like in a bad way, but to bring up something that is true. The fact that it was a great match that didn't need a cell. I personally, when I heard I quit Hell in a Cell, it was a stipulation that on paper sounded like something you'd create in a video game with Match Creator, but when you actually thought about it, it fit the cell to a T, and it was something that needed to happen, because the past couple of Hell in a Cell main events, and we kind of thought this was going to be the main event, if not Sasha and Bailey, we were all wrong. But in terms of the past couple years, we've had these very controversial finishes that had no place happening in the cell. Especially last year's finish with the no contest. So this felt like a great way to have a definitive finish using the cells brutality and using the I Quit match brutality. And there was brutality. There were some awesome storytelling moments. One of my favorite was the introduction of the strap, which for longtime fans of professional wrestling, especially in the confines of the WWE, you've seen so many Samoan strap matches over the years, even with non-Samoan. Shout outs to rest in peace Shad and JTG. But the thing is that with all the elements they brought to that match, I think the one element that fell out of place was the cell itself. Now, the moments where I remember the cell actually coming into play was Jey Uso doing the dual suicide dives, bumping Roman into the cell wall, and Jimmy running through the conveniently opened cell door. And I feel like those moments could have worked without the cell. I feel like more of the I Quit was emphasized in this cell, right, than the actual cell itself. They didn't really play up to the whole you can't run, you can't hide idea with the cell door being locked. You didn't really see the cell being used as a weapon that often. They didn't have to climb the cell, but it's obviously an option that you could have used considering a cell match. And I know the cell has been, watered down in the past couple of years to where it feels more like a cage with weapons. If anything, it resembles more of a one-on-one War Games match to a lot of people now, right? But my thing is, like, if that's the case and you don't really have plans to use the cell, which I think only would have added to what was already a great match. Like if Randy, you believe like it's like close to a 5-star, right? Adding the cell elements, it would have broke the Kenny Omega 7-star thing that Dave Meltzer's been trying to push for the past couple of years. If you don't need an element, don't use it. For me, it's like, adding toppings to an already great meal. It adds more room for error than it does for, adding to the match. And I think that in this case, it didn't add anything. It didn't take away from them. Like, it didn't add anything bad to the match, but it also didn't add anything in general to the match, because it only came into play 3 times in very insignificant roles. It's sort of like in a science project where you have like insignificant data that doesn't have to be applied to the whole thing, but you count it because it happened, right? So for me, That was my only critique of that match. As for the rest of the night, I enjoyed Hell in a Cell for what it was. I wish R-Truth would burn this championship already. I'm happy for Elias and Jeff Hardy, the fact that they get to continue their storyline. But I do want to see Elias start to shift his character. I tweeted it out on Twitter saying that I would like to see Elias get a little bit darker, maybe modify his character. He's had the same character since his NXT debut. And I think it would be cool to see him go more down a Raven-esque route where he's being more cryptic and poetic and his songs have a darker, deeper meaning so that you can play up to him having a darker persona, and that would help him in future feuds to sell him as more credible against guys like a Bray Wyatt in terms of mind games or a Randy Orton in terms of mind games. I think that'd be really awesome to see for Elias. So I hope they get to experiment with that with Jeff, because we've seen Jeff be dark on multiple platforms, most notably back in 09 when he was fighting Undertaker with that God knows what the hell that gray paint was,
Listen,
you know.
that promo,
But it was awesome. No, but it worked. But the thing was like Jeff, you know, his Creatures of the Night, charismatic enigma. He even cut some dark promos a couple years ago when he was U.S. champion, when he was on SmackDown, where you started to feel a different sense of Jeff, like a twisted Jeff. And those are the things that I want to see him and Elias experiment with, because if you really want to sell the story, you can't have them just be the characters you expect them to be. You got to take a risk and see what they can do with other elements, which Randy pointed out. A lot of people in the confines of the quarantine have been capitalizing on their acting skills, capitalizing on the drama, capitalizing on other elements that you need in the business. So I would like to see Elias dwell into that, because the guy's a hell of a performer. He's a hell of a wrestler. He's a hell of a character. And I think he has the business sense and the savvy, especially with his, you know, his hot ass album right now, that he's going to continue to push his brand. Streaming #1 on soundtracks. So, you know, you gotta put that in there. I think that by far the best use of the cell was Sasha and Bailey. I think that they really brought the brutality of the cell. And I said it on the night in the group chat. Sasha Banks has been in all 3 women's Hell in a Cell matches. She's finally got her dub. But Sasha Banks arguably will go down, just off these performances alone, as one of the most unique Hell in a Cell competitors of all time. Period. Some of the stuff that she has brought to the cell has never been done before. And in an era where brutality is displayed very weird in WWE, it's very refreshing to see, you know, Sasha manipulate the cell the way that she does, whether she's running off the walls, putting Becky Lynch onto a chair that is, you know, positioned in the cell itself and whipping her to death. The fact that she's running off tables in the Meteora. Sasha really is not going to have knees by the age of 35. Or a neck, possibly. But I appreciate the effort that she's putting. But like, you saw what she did. I still don't know what that thing was with Bailey, but there was a lot of great storytelling, a lot of great callbacks. The finish with the kicks to the chair was a callback to their match. I think it was back in Full Sail, you know, their NXT title match back there. You know, some of the fact that she got Bailey to bellied on a ladder, you know, like as wild as it looked on some Ken Shamrock type belly to belly, it looked cool. And like, I think that Sasha deserves her flowers just for that, what she's been bringing to a cell match that's been plagued with a lot of problems, as we saw with the Roman situation. I think they did really well. I liked Randy Orton and Drew McIntyre's storytelling. It was very methodical. It was slow building to the finish that we didn't see coming. It achieved its goal. And I also like the little detail that Randy brought a red pipe to a red cell, so you wouldn't see the pipe on the top of the cell, because the whole point was to bait Drew to the top to inflict as much damage as he could, because Drew was overpowering him in every match that they've had. I think that goes kind of like unnoticed, and I think that was really cool, a really cool subtle detail, and we like a lot of the attention to detail. So, you know, I agree with the board. I think that the best match on the card probably was the first match, in terms of getting the drama that you wanted, the stuff that really drew you into the match and sold the fight. But where I digress is that I don't think it was the best cell match of the night. I don't think the cell was needed. And I think that everybody did what they needed to do for the show. And R-Truth burned this championship on I-95.
Yeah.
So, real quick before we move on, though, because you said that you brought up the whole Jeff Hardy being darker. And this is something that I thought about and I read today. Jeff Hardy actually wants to introduce the Willow character into WWE.
That is cool.
Being that Jeff Hardy is on Raw, we also have another dark character on Raw, which is Bray Wyatt, and that's who he wants to feud with when he brings the Willow character.
And I brought that up in a previous episode where I said that if there's any person that would have been a perfect opponent for Bray Wyatt when he was Universal Champion, it would have been Jeff Hardy, because Jeff Hardy at his base has no fear of anything. And he's gone against some of the most, intimidating creatures, I'll use lack of a better term, in WWE history. I mean, this is a guy who literally asked for a no DQ match against The Undertaker back in 2009 and ended up winning. Granted, Big Show interfered, but he ended up winning and earning a lot of people's respect, which was a cool callback to their 0-2 match. And that's me, theorizing what they could do.
And no more dying.
Let's not get hasty.
It's Bray Wyatt.
Let's not get hasty now. And also, Bray Wyatt has done well in extreme environments, and I think that adding the extreme element to it would be interesting. It would be kind of similar to what Abyss was known for in TNA, because you could say a lot about Abyss, how he was very much like Kane, but a lot of people compared him to Mick Foley too, and he was willing to sacrifice his body when needed. I'm not asking for Bray to be a deathmatch wrestler or something from ECW, but if he can get extreme and really sell even more the vibe, like imagine him cut up with barbed wire, bleeding with that. Come on. Like that vision, and that's
just you're a masochist. You know that?
I'm not a masochist. I am doing what Paul Heyman did. I'm accentuating people.
And he's a masochist.
And he is a movie character, and you can't look like that and not have blood in the movie.
Exactly.
I just don't want it
Lesnar as a friend, as a client. That's a masochist.
I just don't want it to be like this. I don't want it to be like how Bray Wyatt and Matt Hardy thing when Matt Hardy went woken. Like I don't want that.
They didn't allow them to go far. I can't put that on them. They did not.
It doesn't. But here's the thing but even so, that was against a woken character, which was meant to be over the top. Willow can be over the top while not having to be hokey, if you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So and that's just for Jeff. I mean, that's a great springboard for Elias and Jeff's program. Elias gets darker, Jeff gets darker. They blend well with the characters who are great at mind games and promos. And when Jeff and Elias are motivated, they can put out a damn good promo that sells you on whatever they're trying to do.
That's a fact, man. That's a fact. It's definitely intriguing. Raw is very much intriguing, and for all intents and purposes, bringing up Abyss is in WWE. He's been working with AJ Styles, so if he's working with AJ Styles, he's on Raw. Bray Wyatt's over there, so best believe, he's gonna have his handprints, even if it's just a little touch.
Imagine if he was brought in as part of that Twisted Union.
Oh my God.
Oh, that would be crazy.
Speaking of Abyss and whatchamacallit, the former TNA people, Bound for Glory, of course, was another pay-per-view that took place. Real quick, you had the Rock do the whole, nod to Ken Shamrock, the whole speech for Ken Shamrock, but also it was headlined and capped off by a championship win by one Rich Swann. Guys, what do you think about that whole thing? And just touch base on it as a whole.
Swann deserved it. He's been I've been a fan of Rich Swann since the Cruiserweight Classic. That's when I discovered him. I know other people who know him since the Indies knew Rich Swann before, but I discovered Rich Swann in WWE. So suck it, indie guys. When it comes to, he deserved it. He had a great match against Eric Young, and Eric, listen, man, he's the heart and soul of that company. As one of the originals of that company. I mean, it may not be TNA anymore, but it's still Impact, and he's one of the originals, and he did a great job helping him out. EC3 and Moose.
Oof. Fire.
Man.
Fire.
EC3, you didn't think, EC3 was one of those, he's something that MJF wishes he was, but back then. But the fact that he turned it and became darker and became more aggressive against a Moose, I loved what I saw from the match. What else happened that night? The tag team match was good too. I kind of felt bad for I think Kylie Ray, who should have showed up for the women's match. I kind of felt bad because anxiety is real, and if that was the case, I really feel bad. And it's human error and things like that happen. The X Division title match was pretty good too. Chris Bay should have won it, even though he didn't hold it long enough when he first won it. But that's just that. I'm not sure what they're doing. Kind of wish my boys won it, aka the Good Brothers.
Talking Shop Mania 2, by the way.
That's right. Talking Shop Mania.
There, I saw an advert where Carl Anderson was training his dick by having it be punched like a speed bag.
Oh, yo, like also, on the topic of the Good Brothers, I hope their little thing, their cartoon thing, gets greenlit by Cartoon Network, because they're doing some really good stuff on Instagram. So shout out to them and Enzo
on Adult Swim
and Lisa Ann, who's on the show earlier this week. So
what? Wait a second.
They had a really good thing.
Wait a minute, that threw me off. All right.
And don't worry. I earlier today, this has absolutely nothing to do with it. But before we got on, Mom was watching Jeopardy, and there was like a thing. The answer was Hannah Montana, but apparently Hannah Montana was meant to be named Alexis Texas at a point. I turned around, I was just like, and the fact that I turned around, I was just like, yo, man, you know what? This ain't me. Something wrong with me if I gotta stop and look back. But we gonna move that on. But fellas,
non-stop action, huh?
Total TNA. So speaking of Impact, we have the falling out after Bound for Glory. We have NXT tomorrow. We with basically the whole spin the wheel, make a deal sort of deal. The title matches. You have Loomis versus your boy Cameron Grimes, and on the other end, AEW basically continuing that whole a tournament. I just saw earlier today Wardlow basically doing his training video in Hype versus he. And
I want to bring up something, especially with the was it AEW? Yeah, with AEW last week, because a lot of people were very critical about this, and
musical.
Spoke on this, the musical.
I'll
tell you something. I'm gonna put something out there, and
please say
it. Dawkins said this on the Jobber Tears podcast, so shout out to him. This is sports entertainment at the end of the day, but that's not. I don't have a problem with the fans, because the IWC is gonna deny, it's not sports entertainment, it's this, it's that. Then there's some that are actually gonna agree. I have a problem with AEW. AEW, as much as they don't want to be WWE, they are. As much as they don't want to be it, they are. At the end of the day, like Dawkins said, wrestling is a sports entertainment thing. That's what it is.
Preach on it.
Entertained, regardless, whether it's a promo, backstage segment, on-screen segment, off-screen segment, it doesn't matter. No matter where you see these things, you're going to be entertained one way or another. It's storylines that are enticed with drama that you're going to be invested in, and that eventually you're going to be entertained and want to see more of. It is sports, clearly, because wrestling is a sport. It is sports, and you get the entertainment side as far as the drama goes, the acting, everything that's involved. So for those in AEW, or for those fans who are watching that feel like this is not sports entertainment, this is sports entertainment down to its fifth power. That's exactly what it is. You can't no way get around it. I don't know, I just picked 5. You can't dance around the fact that it's not sports entertainment. Even, again, to Dawkins' point, even UFC even tried to do a sports entertainment themed thing, but for them, it doesn't really work, because I guess you can make the argument of they have real athletes. I'm using quotations on that, but I mean, even their guys jump ship and come to WWE.
Right,
that should tell you something.
We're getting flagged.
The dynamic, like how I feel is like we've been all conditioned as wrestling fans in America. One, whole succinct style of wrestling, which is why like once we saw like New Japan and stuff like that, like our minds kind of were just peaked. Our interest was peaked. You have the press post, you know, interview similar to UFC and things of that nature. But we all at the end of the day come back to what we know. We were talking about earlier with the whole fact that wrestling was big when they were talking about how stories basically mattered. Randy was mentioning, you know, the Edge and Randy. You know, we were talking about the, you know, the Firefly Funhouse and, you know, all these different things that basically piqued our interests as wrestling fans. I think that us as Americanized fans, we're used to that whole deal. So as much as we want that new thing, we kind of know about that old thing. And yeah, go ahead, Ty.
No, because like here's the thing. Every professional wrestling organization essentially comes down to that names. Like as much as people hate sports entertainment, they use it as a way to say this is strictly WWE, which Eric hit on the nail perfectly in the sense that like that's what a lot of people say. No, this is pro wrestling. This is sports. No, they are two sides of the same. They actually explain each other. One's a definition for the other. And even in other promotions, like Japan has full contact elbows and knees, and they implement mixed martial arts based maneuvers in strong style, or they implement, you know, European catch and American elements from the old territorial days in King's Road, Royal Road style that you see in Noah and you see in Prime All Japan, right? It doesn't matter where you go around the spectrum. They all end up serving a similar purpose. It's just, you know, pro wrestling and MMA are on a similar coin in the sense that one, with pro wrestling, you get more options. It's a canvas. Pro wrestling is a canvas where you can write the narrative however you want. You can have the most legitimate fights in pro wrestling, believe it or not, depending on how you approach what you want to do. You can have the most bogus fights. You can have anything from Pro Wrestling Noah to Lucha Underground. And it all depends on how you want your promotion to be portrayed, what talent you want to use, what storylines you want to go with, what narratives you want to build. It's an open field to do what you want. And like you said, Jay, a lot of people are conditioned by, you know, American, not so much, I'm not going to put it all in the American style, but definitely on the cartoonish nature of the WWF, because that's where a lot of mainstream fans get their, you know, their references and, you know, their evidence to say why pro wrestling is this and that. And I can say from a personal standpoint, I've been struggling with my fandom of pro wrestling this whole year in many different facets because of how weird it's been, the environment of it right now, and how I thought of, well, why would I want to watch this when MMA basically does that? And MMA, where they lack is the fact that they can sell you on the credibility and legitimacy of the fighters, right? But what else brings you to the fight other than, you know, someone's going to get knocked out? And in some cases, that might be all you need. But if they took more elements from professional wrestling, they'd be killing pro wrestling right now. If they had more stuff on their docs, because they used to do a lot of documentaries building people, they're training into the fight, you know, more shit talking from the people. A lot of the best characters in combat sports are people who derive their shit from pro wrestling. The most blatant example, Muhammad Ali, who got half his shit from Gorgeous George. And in more recent years, Conor McGregor, who's been called out multiple times by wrestlers, including Ric Flair himself, for saying that you're welcome for your gimmick, son. So as far as I'm concerned, bringing it back to the original point, I'm not surprised that AEW is doing what they're doing, because AEW's whole deal, as much as they wanted to be the anti-WWE, they really wanted to be an alternative. And being an alternative doesn't mean you have to derive from an already existing formula. You just have to manipulate it to your advantage to get the most fans invested in your product, which is why shit like this works, especially with two character-driven people like MJF and Chris Jericho, who had the best segment on Raw in the past 10 years with the Festival of Friendship. Why are you expecting anything less? He sold you on a Game of Thrones-esque segment that ended in him getting beat with his own damn clipboard.
He sold you on The Price is Right.
And on that, yeah, and on and how did he, all the oil in the world, he got that name tag on the city. My point being is, like, stop trying to, you know, go after a different approach to a fight. Stop trying to go after a different approach to get you invested in a fight. No, hold on, Eric. Okay, this is very passionate to me. Stop trying to go after something that has clearly worked and clearly continues to work. Being immersed in the experience is nothing to be ashamed of. That's the whole point of every single sport you watch. The only difference between pro wrestling and other sports is that they're more open about telling you what they want to do.
Thank you.
All you have to do is be more willing to understand their side. It's a very misunderstood sport because of how it's paying for the sins of its father and generations of mistakes from previous decades. We get that. But at its base, it literally pulls you in all the time. And don't tell me it doesn't, because if The Rock shows up on Raw one week, you don't give a damn what story's happening that week. You're going to come in just to see what he does.
Listen, George Kittle from the San Francisco 49ers had a documentary, like a mini doc, based on his love for wrestling. Tore up his jersey to put it on a mask to resemble Pentagon Jr. Okay? That's how deep fandom goes for professional wrestling. Professional wrestling to fans is sports entertainment. It's a fantasy. Like I said before, it's a soap opera.
And it can also be reality.
All rolled into one. All rolled into one.
It could be whatever you want it to be because it's an open field, an open canvas that can be manipulated in any way.
I just want to say this real quick. The one thing that I want AEW to do going into this new year is I want them to just be honest with themselves. Be honest with yourself, because everything that you try to do different from everyone else, you've called back to what everyone else is doing.
Which is why I'm watching NXT this week, actually. I'll get to that.
Stop the win-loss records, because they don't mean anything anymore.
That's not such a bad thing, actually.
It's not a bad thing, but the thing is that the win-loss records were supposed to count as, okay, if John Moxley is the champion and he's 4-1 in the singles division, that means the next person underneath him is supposed to be the number one contender. Why are we trying to figure out who's going to be the number one contender to John Moxley's title?
I'm just arguing you could fix it. You don't have to outright get rid of it. You could just admit you were wrong, like you said. Be honest with yourself, and then fix it. You don't have to get rid of it. You just fix it.
I think, but if you're not using it, what's the point in using it? That's my point. What's the point in using it if you're not using it? Then you have the third person and the fourth person. It goes on so on and so forth. Because if we really want to sit here and think about it, and really want to sit here and talk about it, there's been plenty of people who have been stepped on for a title opportunity for the AEW World Heavyweight Championship. Let's just speak on it. There's a lot of people that have been stepped on. Darby Allin was not supposed to get an opportunity. They only gave it to him because the fans wanted it, and he was hot at the time, and he was on the rise. That's it. I don't mind showcasing talent because, don't get me wrong, AEW has the talent. They have the talent. But the point is that there's plenty of guys who haven't got a title opportunity. Pac is one of them, though it's going on during this pandemic, he can't come overseas yet. But Pac is one person that's way overdue for a title opportunity. And when he's able to travel, they need to insert him right away because he's way overdue for that. Hangman Page never got a fair rematch. That's another person. Never got a fair rematch. He fought for the title one time when it was basically Vacant had the title. Vacant had the title, and it was Chris Jericho and Hangman Page. And of course, they went the right direction with Chris Jericho, which I had no problems with, but he never chased the title. They immediately put him in the tag title division. So that's another person. Who else? I could sit here and name like at least 3 or 4 more people that deserved an AEW World Heavyweight title. And then on top of that, even their women's division, again, not taking credit for this, Dawkins put this out there too, they need to look at right now what WWE is doing. Because we give a lot of shit for WWE and their women's division, but Sasha Banks and Bayley, they basically showed what they need to, how storytelling needs to be done, at least in women's wrestling. And AEW's women's wrestling, basically right now, they're looking at each other like, well, you're going to take turns with the AEW Women's Championship this week, or am I going to come out with it? Basically, that's what they're doing. There's no storytelling within the women's division in AEW. So I want AEW to basically say, listen, we tried to be different. We messed up. Here's how we're going to fix it.
I ain't messing. Y'all fucked up.
And basically be a sports entertainment-based show. As much as Cody doesn't want to be that guy to admit that he's wrong and admit that he wants to be the little brother to the big brother competition, that's what you're gonna have to do.
I mean that.
I think there's a little there's something there. There's a couple points.
I mean,
one, I think Cody and like everyone, the execs, I feel like they understand that because Cody Rhodes comes from what? He comes from a family of storytellers. He doesn't come from a family of like, you know, I mean, they do have fantastic 5-star matches, but they are more so built on storytelling. So I know that it's known that storytelling would have some form of precedence there. I'll say this much on the women's division with AEW. And to a lesser extent, the other divisions. Since it's such a new company, and I know, like, you know, it seems like a crutch, but there's still so much more people who are coming in and out of that company. It's not even funny.
That's
like,
true.
Like
women's division especially.
Matt Cardona spent a month in AEW, and he's gone. You know, they had what they had that match. I believe I forget her name last pay-per-view.
Thunder Rosa.
Thunder Rosa.
She's in NWA.
NWA World's Women's Champion. Yeah, they're
again.
Yeah,
you have a lot of those things. So I can't, as much as I want to harp on the fact that they need to, because they do have a lot of things that they need some fine tuning. In the same regard, it's very hard to like basically set that down, because for all the shit that we give AEW, again, look what we were just talking about at the very top of the show. The fact that the brand split just happened, and now they're having the whole Survivor Series thing.
And then on top of that, the whole like sports entertainment thing, I just kind of want to put this to bed. Look, the terms pro wrestling and sports entertainment are interchangeable. They're okay. It's not taboo. The thing is like with pro wrestling being a canvas for so many different ways to go about a story or go about a company or just an approach in general, right? There's nothing wrong with going on one side of the spectrum or the other. There are promotions that pride themselves on being very more sport oriented, where it's like 80% sports focus and 20% entertainment focus. That's kind of what Japan's been doing for the past God knows how long, right? There are companies that pride themselves more on being entertainment based, where WWE is the other side of the spectrum on the 80-20, right? AEW, like to say that AEW needs to be more sports entertainment based, I think that statement, while I understand the intentions behind it, it already is. Like AEW has already done wacky, crazy things. I mean, the shit that got them over in the first place was Jericho talking about a little bit of the bubbly. It was a segment that just got cut into a GIF and it just went viral and got Jericho more plays on Judas. Like, the thing is, I don't mind. Like, my thing with what you're saying, you're not wrong. They need to start making their approach count, as opposed to just putting they need to put their money where their mouth is and stick to what actually they want to do. You can introduce an element, and because it's an open canvas, it can work, because a lot of ideas can work on paper, right? But if you don't execute like you say, I agree with you. It's like, why did you bring it up in the first place? Which is why I'm saying, like, if they want to go for more of a sports feel, they brought back the time limit. Matches actually end after the time limit, as opposed to WWE where they just end based on a minute mark because of how they're produced. They brought in the win-loss record. They brought in the number, like all these elements, right? I agree with you, Eric. They should use them better. But I don't think they should go more in the direction of sports entertainment where you're saying like they should, embrace the entertainment aspect more. I think they will. But there's nothing wrong with them being 60% sport and 40% entertainment either, is what I'm trying to say.
I'll even take that. Right now, their biggest segment was that segment. I think that was, in my humble opinion, I think because that got people talking, that's their biggest segment. I mean, you can call back to Sammy getting hit with the golf cart during a match, but that's during the match.
No, yeah, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm saying, like, what I'm saying is, the way you're speaking, you're giving off a different impression. Their formula isn't the problem. How they use their assets is the problem, is what I'm trying to say. Because what you're saying implies that their formula is flawed to begin with, and I don't believe it is. And I'm not even the biggest AEW fan. But I will say that if they use their assets better and emphasize more the sport feel they were trying to go for, as Jay looks off into the distance, Well, so you've been killing me. You've been killing me for like the past 3 minutes. But like, if they use their assets better and go for more of that sports feel, they'll drive in those alternative fans right away. Like that's why I said with MMA, if they implemented more spectacle-esque elements that sports entertainment proudly uses, they would be murdering the entire combat sports industry right now because boxing can't really touch their mainstream popularity unless Floyd or Pacquiao's fighting or it's Wilder or Fury, right? Unless you got those big names, no one knows or gives a fuck who the fighters are, and that's not fair to the fighters because there are a lot of great fighters. But if MMA, which has replaced boxing in the mainstream for a lot of people, took more elements from WWE, as mentioned by many legends, including Josh Barnett, who ties between both, they'd be murdering everything. And the same thing goes for AEW. I think, if anything, the brand that does that the best is NXT.
Yeah.
Yes.
And which is what I'm looking forward to watching this week, which is what I was trying to rope us back. I'm helping you, Jay. I'm trying to rope us back in. Because NXT has NXT's in a situation right now where they're thriving without their top champion. Like NXT has 2 title matches set for Halloween Havoc tomorrow, hosted by the lovely Shotzi Blackheart, who's howling like a goddess in these promos. All right, I'm done with the semi-simp sounding segment. But you got a situation where there are 2 championship matches tomorrow, one being a takeover rematch with Candice LeRae and Io Shirai, which is going to be very, very match sports centric. But you can see Candice is seeing herself as an evil princess. And you're okay with that because she's making you respect it, which is what wrestling is also really good at. As ridiculous as it is, you can respect a lot of the outlandish shit that they do because they do it so well you can't fuck with it. And that's what NXT's been doing very well. Capital Wrestling Center changed from the Performance Center. That's some subtle switches. We got 2 title matches in which Damian Priest is fighting, in my opinion. I think Damian Priest is one of my favorite dance partners for Johnny Gargano. We're having another takeover rematch tomorrow. And if the first match is an indicator of anything, these styles that we didn't think would go very well are going to go very well. And they're bringing back this roulette wheel, which makes me question if Cyber Sunday is going to be the next pay-per-view they bring back to life. Please?
Just bring it back.
Yeah,
or better yet, if they're going to do another NXT Tuesday, Taboo Tuesday.
Triple H is straight robbing people of their pay-per-view rights.
No,
He's just like
robbing.
No, it's in the same company. He ain't got.
No,
Like,
he's literally.
It's like it's the equivalent of like, hey, you found like an old like ornament in the closet. Hey, uncle, yeah, could I use this? Sure. All right, cool.
Bro, if I'm gonna compare for the younger audience, it's like if you went into your uncle's closet and you found a GameCube and decided I'm gonna do some GameCube walkthroughs on my YouTube as a way to show some respect to the retro and bring it back to prominence for people who don't know. Halloween Havoc is one of the most desired pay-per-views to come back, as was Great American Bash, and now we're having a theme night for this week. And I wish they would have just did it on Saturday as a takeover because it's literally on Saturday. But point
remember,
being,
what's after Saturday? War Games.
Listen, I have the network. I would have watched both back-to-back weeks. But my point being is that my point being is that, with the rest of the business and all the controversies, the fans are going to have their opinions. Everybody's on Team Sports Entertainment, Pro Wrestling. I'm here as well as everybody in the Backstage Brawl to say to you, what makes sports entertainment, pro wrestling awesome is being able to have a balance of great in-ring action from the sport and the balance of the drama or whatever invests you into the fight. That could take the form of drama, that could take the form of presentation, that could take the form of camera angles, promos, anything. But the spectrum is open for interpretation. Because if I want to get as unrealistic as I want to, I got Ricochet and Lucha Underground doing spin flips off aprons into kicks into coffins. Or if I want to get as realistic as the sport actually is, you can legitimately watch any promotion in Japan that promotes full contact fighting. A lot of which paved the way for modern MMA, UFI, and Pancrase Stand Up. My point being, there's a lot of options, a lot of different interpretations. There are no excuses. MMA, you're going to have to step your game up because eventually people are going to get bored of just knockouts and submissions. You're going to have to find another way to draw people into fights. But yeah, that's my way to tie this up because I know we on the 2-hour mark with all these passionate ass rants.
Yeah.
About an hour 30.
1 hour 30? All right. We did our job. How's that for a weekend of wrestling?
Yeah, no, that's a fact. And for all intents and purposes, we missed you guys, fellow brawlers, to y'all watching us because, we weren't able to record. So we had a lot of things to catch up on. But that being said,
Before we go,
yeah.
we have a birthday tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. We will be turning 7 as a group.
Yes.
Tomorrow is our birthday, October 27th. We reached 7 years as a Backstage Brawl group. Myself and founding member, founding father, my tag team partner, Diamond Cutter. We founded this 8 years ago with the founding father.
Which date? You said the 28th?
Tomorrow's the 28th.
Well, call me an old ass uncle because I didn't know when we were born.
All right. Well, listen. All right. Well,
So,
yeah, we
got a birthday tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. So
All right.
7 years, and this is our first year doing this. So.
Maybe when we do the next show, because it's actually funny how we came together as a group.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Believe it or not, we all didn't know each other. So we'll talk about that on the next episode, definitely.
In the words of Kid Dynamite, point being, we gonna get to it. I'm the golden child.
Fucking ass.
Diamond Cutter. Kid Ty. People's Champ. You said that at least 10 times this episode, though. You gotta be honest.
Hey,
I'm gonna get a counter next episode on me.
Let's not digress 10 times. Myself included. Let's just. What the fuck is that, Eric? That's a vagina. That's not a diamond.
All right, peace. Keep recording. I'm out.
Oh man.